Hi everybody, welcome to the channel. Got a good video today. Wanted to talk a little bit about cleaning firearms, specifically in this case semi-automatic handguns. So just wanted to kind of lay out there my approach, what I take, the approach that I take, how I go about determining how to clean my firearms. It could be different, could be pieces of it could be the same. That you all use, and but anyway, wanted to throw that out there and get comments from everybody. How do you do it? Do you use a similar approach? You use a very different approach? Love to hear your comments. Please post those down below. I think that's the best part of doing these kind of videos. I learn in just about every video that I make, and look forward to the comments, appreciate them. You can't learn and get better unless you're willing to listen to others that may certainly be more experienced than you. So hope I can learn from you, and maybe I hope I can pass something on to you folks as we go through this. So just start by kind of laying out my approach. So I don't clean my firearms the same way every time. In my opinion, I think that you have to look at the use of each firearm and determine your approach and how you clean it, how thorough you clean it, and what schedule you should clean it on. And I think those have a lot to do with the type of use, really the type of use you have the firearm. Do you shoot it a lot? Does it stay in the safe a lot? Is it somewhere in the middle, right? So I like to break it down into three different levels in terms of each firearm. So a level one is more like, I view it as more like someone who does a lot of collecting, just really collects firearms. I think a lot of us have those firearms that we just never shoot. They might be really expensive, or just might be firearms that we don't like to shoot as much as others. So I look at those as firearms that, like I said, they're not shot a lot. They live in the safe, and that brings a whole different level of concern in terms of cleaning, and most importantly, maybe lubrication, right? So corrosion is a big issue, or could be a big issue on firearms like this, right? And it's something that I'm not sure is as intuitive as lubrication for moving parts, right? So corrosion on these firearms could potentially be an issue. It could often occur in storage environments where humidity is high, right? Not everybody can have their safe in their house, where you'd have an HVAC system, say in the summertime, preventing a high humidity situation. So it's important that these firearms are visually inspected throughout, to be sure no corrosion's building up or taking place. Carbon typically in these firearms are not is not a concern, right? But certainly corrosion can be. So I think it makes a lot of sense to get in some sort of routine to get into these firearms, regardless of whether they've been shot or not. Next level is sort of like a hobbyist, right? So a lot of people may fall into this category. So these firearms, they kind of have a dynamic usage, right? They can be shot frequently at times, maybe a couple times throughout the year. You go on vacation, you bring your firearms with you, and your buddy's got a range, and you're going to his place, and you shoot them a decent amount, but only in a short window, and maybe only a couple times per year. So there's more of a tendency for these firearms to have carbon on them, as opposed to the level one collector category that we're sort of arbitrarily making up. But still, there's a good portion of the year that these firearms could be subjected to corrosion. So I think for this sort of level two, or the folks that use firearms more of in a hobby perspective, these firearms need to be looked at for carbon buildup when they're used, and then throughout the year when they're not being used for corrosion, right? So you want to make sure that all the metal parts on the firearm have some sort of lubrication on them, right? Could be a silicone rag, right? Could be just your lubricating oil, right? Just to get that on the firearm. I think if from my experience, when I purchased firearms, typically in the gun store, when I'm handling the firearm for the first time from the manufacturer, there's a lot of oil on the firearm. It's loaded up. There's oil in places that typically they wouldn't be if you were using it often. And I have heard this from people, but it just makes sense to me, right? That OEMs do that because they don't know the usage of the firearm, right? That firearm could be sitting in the case that it came with from the manufacturer to the gun store for years or days or weeks. You just don't know. So I think the OEMs do a good job or try to do a good job to lubricate the firearm to protect against corrosion. And that's why I've also researched and heard that the best thing to do when you do purchase a new firearm is to lubricate it immediately, because they're not lubricated from factory to shoot. I don't know how true that is, but it makes sense that you would be lubricating it for corrosion resistance, because you just don't know how long that firearm is going to be sitting before it's sold. Which brings me sort of the next level, the medium level, the weekend level, right? So the third level are, you know, firearms that are typically shot fairly often, more on a routine basis than the other two levels. You know, these firearms, you know, that you'd use, that you'd own, you know, you'll probably use them on weekends at the gun range or wherever. You know, maybe you miss a weekend tour here and there, but they're shot monthly. You know, your corrosion is typically not an issue because you got your hands on these quite a bit. You know, you're inspecting them, you're probably cleaning them more often because they're being built up with carbon. You know, so you're putting lubrication on them more often, so they don't have a tendency really to draw corrosion. And then the level 4 and 5 are more of that I view it. They're more of you know, like a competition shooter that's shooting, you know, tons of rounds every weekend. You know, they reload their own ammo potentially, right? And they're shooting every weekend, right? So that brings a whole different level of service that's needed more regularly, you know. And then folks that use their firearms for their line of work, right? You know, those folks should have probably a different regiment for cleaning their firearms more often, right? To make sure it's in good working order, as their lives could depend on it, right? So that's kind of how I look at it. I look at it as at different levels depending on what you need. So looking at that schedule, you know, and whatever you determine it could be, you know, I like to do, you know, 3 different types of services. You know, first one is the basic one, the field stripping it and cleaning the barrel and, you know, getting parts of the slide and wherever you can in the actual frame itself. So that's a very basic service. I try to do that depending on what level, on the usage of the gun, what level the gun is being used at. You know, I'll do that fairly often. And then all the way to like a full service, where a full service would be taking the firearm apart, doing a full disassembly of every part, cleaning those parts in the ultrasonic cleaner, going over it by hand, doing an inspection, a close inspection, visual, and then, you know, reassembling the parts together again and proper lubrication. Now, when I say proper lubrication, I mean just follow OEM guidelines. By no means in any of the cleaning of your firearms should you do something different than what the manufacturer recommends. You know, the manufacturer doesn't get into specific details, but they certainly go through certain things that you really should follow in the owner's manual, from my experience. So regardless of what's said here, OEM guidelines always has to be followed. And to get into this full service, even partial service, you want to make sure that you have the ability to do that and you've been properly trained. I have some armor certifications myself, so I feel very comfortable in doing this, and I would not recommend doing any of this, any kind of breakdown past a field strip, unless you had some experience, some mechanical experience, some certification before you do that. So, but there are people out there that can do it, so you still should be able to get your firearm serviced correctly. And then you know, the partial service is really just it's really just, you know, taking the slide down, not really breaking the FCU down or the lower. I've kind of laid out here in front of you the different levels and what I do. So if we start over to the right, this is the SIG P226 Legion. So that's going to be obviously a typical field strip, right? So the firearms in field strip, I'll put some Hops 9 right in the barrel. You know, I'll clean that out good. I'll brush off the recoil spring. I'll get some brushes, right? Clean in the slide really good. because I'm not doing anything or pulling the striker out, or in this case the firing pin because it's hammer fired. I'm not going to do anything in the firing pin cavity, but the entire slide will be cleaned out really well. I said the barrel, and you just kind of try to get in the FCU area in the frame as best you can. So that's going to be just a field strip breakdown, and I just call that when I'm going to do it my basic service. Moving over to the left, this is more of a partial service. So it's the same thing that was done in the basic service, except the slide is stripped out. So if it was a hammer fired, the firing pin would come out so we can expose the channel that the firing pin resides in, the extractor, so we can really clean that well. In this case, this is a striker fired firearm. It's the SIG P320. So the striker would come out, the striker would be disassembled, the extractor would come out, the entire upper slide would be stripped and cleaned. In this case, I would typically use the ultrasonic cleaner in the slide, in the barrel. The parts that you see here would get ultrasonic clean. The FCU itself, depending on how dirty it was, I would try to as best I could to clean it by hand, but I would have the option to use the ultrasonic cleaner in there to really get everything out of in the the sear housing, but a lot of times you can get this done by hand without much of an issue. And then the grip module, you can certainly clean that as well. So that's more of a partial clean. So those two are, partial cleans, takes a little bit more effort, right? You're basically stripping the entire upper, but you're not taking the FCU apart. Or if it was a GLOCK, you would not be taking the lower apart, right? You would just be taking the upper apart. Moving on here, the last three examples over here to the left, I have a Glock 42, a Glock 43, and a SIG P320. It's the X5 Legion. So these are all examples of what a full service would look like. So again, uppers completely stripped, lowers completely stripped. With the P320, you're stripping the entire FCU, where in the partial you would not. These parts separately would go into the ultrasonic cleaner. They would get cleaned, they would get hand dried and inspected. The barrel would, before the barrel went into the ultrasonic cleaner, I typically would use Hops 9. I'd set that in there. I'd run a bore snake through it a couple times to get any crud that might be off there, and then I would put it in the ultrasonic cleaner. The slide would go in the ultrasonic cleaner. You have to be careful because I don't take my red dots off when I do that, but what I will do is I'd put a platform underneath it so it can sit in the ultrasonic cleaner and the level not come close to the optic. So I'd be able to clean the slide in the ultrasonic cleaner without sacrificing, or damaging, I should say, the optic, right? And you just got to play around to see how high, depending on the level of the ultrasonic cleaner. Like I said, the FCU would be stripped, in this case in the P320. They'd be taken apart, inspected, and roll pins changed out. Those are throwaway parts, so you should, if you're doing this, you should have extra parts on hand. And I'm going to stop there for a minute. When you're breaking firearms down to this level, it is a very, very good idea to have extra parts on hand. Obviously, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but I'm sure like many others, have dropped springs. I mean, there's some very, very small parts in the striker. There's some small parts here in the FCU, but these are very easy to go bye-bye when you're at the worst possible time. So it makes a lot of sense to have extra parts, which I try to carry all the time. So feels a lot better when I know I got a spare spring and I'm struggling to try to find it. And then if I can't, I got to order a part, and then I'm sitting here waiting with my firearm out of service. So anyway, and then, after the ultrasonic cleaner, after the inspection, they would be put back together. The firearm would be function checked to make sure it was fine, and the gun would return back to service. If anything looked bad or you needed to replace any parts, the P320s, sometimes the trigger bar spring gets bent. There's, like I said, the roll pins. There's there's some things that just you can look at and they're out of whack. The sear springs, you could change those. Those all should be changed out during a full service if it's noticed to have any wear or just not look correct. Same thing on the Glocks. So the uppers would be taking out the striker, disassembled. All right, ultrasonic cleaning done throughout. When the one piece is one thing to remember when you're using the ultrasonic cleaner is that will really dry out the material. So if you're going to use an ultrasonic cleaner, you have to make sure that you lubricate all the metal properly. You don't want to have you don't want to, because it will dry the metal out significantly. And we talked about how corrosion, can impact that. So if we look at here in the Glock 43, when it comes out, you want to either use a silicone cloth, or you can use oil, or you can use both. These have not been cleaned yet. I'm in the process of doing that. But the one thing is, where your striker goes, you don't want to use like a normal CLP. You want to use something that is going to be dry. You don't want any oil or anything in there that's going to attract dirt. So one thing that I use is the Lucas Oil Extreme Duty Gun Cleaner. It's extreme drying. So you could spray that in there in about a minute or two. It is completely dry. And it kind of leaves like a Teflon, or it feels like it leaves like a Teflon coating on the parts. So I don't I don't use lubricating oil on any of my strikers, firing pins, anything that's in that cavity. I keep it dry. I use the Extreme Duty Gun Cleaner, the extreme drying agent, and it's just worked really well for me. Any parts in there, that's what I'm going to use on that. Everything else is fine with the CLP and everything. And the other thing too is, for my ultrasonic machines, I use the Lucas Extreme Duty Bore Solvent. So this is specifically for ultrasonic cleaners, and it works great. It doesn't dry. It doesn't significantly dry the metal out. It leaves sort of a very thin layer of, like I said, it's probably not a Teflon layer, but it feels like sort of like some sort of properties of lubrication from that, but it's very dry. There's nothing wet on it. So I'm real happy with that. I do like the Lucas Oil products. I have a bunch of SIG firearms, and they do recommend that. So yeah. So again, the Glocks will be taken down, the trigger right down to the triggers, taken apart to get in any crevice to make sure that all that's clean. It'll be inspected and then reassembled, full function check, and the gun again returned to service. The other thing I'll do is, when the firearm is reassembled and the function check is passed, I'll just use a silicone cloth to kind of protect it and to make sure all the metal has a layer of this on it before I put it back in my safe. It doesn't have to be soaking wet, but that layer is up. But that layer stays on there, and you can tell. The last piece is, I'll clean my red dots. I just use like a screen cleaner. So I'll spray that in the lenses on each side of my red dots, and I'll use a Q-tip, and then I'll finish it off with the cleaning towel that usually comes with those. So anyway, there you go. So that's the 3 different types of services that I like to perform on my firearms and use. Again, depending on how frequently you use your firearm. The rule of thumb I use is, if they're just sitting in the safe, then break it down every like 4 years. Fully disassemble it every 4 years or so, to get in there and do like a full service on it. That's what I do. A partial, I'll go into it every couple years, every say 2 years, and that gets me at least to be able to check for the corrosion inside the actual firearm itself. And then every 4 years you can really get a breakdown of what's going on in there. But every 2 years for a partial, and then every year just do a field strip. Make sure the gun is the firearm doesn't have any corrosion in it, and it's just lubed up right, and it's not showing any signs of corrosion in the safe. So that's what I'll typically do for that. And then the level where you're just level 2, like if it's just your hobby and you're shooting weekends here and there, maybe a couple times a year, break it down basically what I just said in half. I do a full service every 2 years on those, a partial every year. I'll break those down annually, and then I'll do a basic service a couple times a year on those, typically before I go out, and then when I come home If I'm only using it once or twice a year, then I'll do a partial. And then you know, if you're just using them every weekend, you know, again, cut the level 2 in half. Every year I'll do a full service, and then, you know, about 4 times a year I'll break it down to the quarterly level, and then every month I'll do a basic. Now remember, that's when you're shooting every weekend. And then the last 2 is just when, you know, I don't use my firearms this way, but if I were using them competitively or professionally, I would do a full service probably 4 times a year. Every quarter I'd do a full service, and then I would do a partial service every month, and every use I'd be doing a field strip. So I mean, it doesn't take much to come home at night, field strip it down, clean it up, and then put it back together. So that's what I do. Love to hear what you guys do. You know, sometimes I get a little like really I get real complex with this, and I kind of lay things out, and I really get into it to see how, you know, to see how I do certain things and the schedules I use. You know, again, this is a hobby of mine. I love doing it. I enjoy cleaning my firearms as much as I like shooting them, which seems really weird. I get it, but I really like the mechanics of it, and understanding how the firearms work and keeping them in very good working order. Your firearms are not they're not cheap. They're expensive. They're expensive pieces of equipment, if you want to call them that, right? Tools. And you know, so it makes a lot of sense to keep them in good working order. To be honest, I'm sure that the manufacturers would tell you do not have to clean them at that rate. I'm sure there's some people that have shot thousands of rounds in their firearms without them being cleaned. I get that. That's fine. This is just how I do it. I feel like I want to keep the guns clean, my firearms clean, so that they can always be in good working order. So, and again, it's my hobby, and I get enjoyment from it. I like doing that. I learn probably every time I do this, you know, I learn more and more how they function, especially when I get you know, friends and family that ask me if I can do it for them, and it's a firearm that I haven't done it with yet. I learn a ton. So anyway, hope you guys like the video. Please you know, let me know your comments. Love to hear how you guys clean your firearms and what approach you take. You know, and if you like this video and you like the content that I've been putting out, you think I've earned it, please subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. It means a lot. Like I said, I'm trying to grow the channel. Again, it's a hobby of mine, so but I really enjoy it, and you know, I hope you guys get a lot from it. So with that said, everybody have a good day, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Be safe. Take care, everybody.